December 18th, 1974. Henry Bowman was not thinking about guns or shooting as he tossed the bulk rate envelopes in the trash and divided his first-class mail into bills and everything else. He was reviewing in his mind if there was anyone on his Christmas list he had neglected when his telephone rang. Hello? Henry, it's Ed. Glad I caught you. Have you seen the latest shotgun news? Ed Barber was referring to a publication that came out twice a month. It was 96 pages of newsprint published in Hastings, Nebraska, which was composed entirely of classifieds and display ads for firearms and firearms-related products. It's here, but I haven't looked at it yet. Well, you'd better get to it. Some guy's got a 4-bore for sale. What? Henry almost screamed. I think he's a dealer. It's in the classified sections under rifles for sale. I don't have my copy in front of me, but it's a Rota. The ad said both barrels were fully rifled and the gun weighed 24 pounds. I'll call you back, Henry said quickly and hung up the phone. It took him 4 minutes to find the most recent copy of Shotgun News, turn to the rifles for sale section and locate the 1-inch ad. R.B. Rota 4-bore double rifle, 24-pound back-action underlever hammer gun, built in 1880 to 1882. Brown Damascus barrels, fully rifled, mint bores, beautiful engravings, elephants, rhinos, lion. Original case, some loading tools, not original. Serious inquiries only, no collect calls, Jim. Henry stared at the ad and looked at the date at the top of the page. Damn, I hope this issue hasn't been out long. He was kicking himself for not skimming through it as soon as it had arrived in his mailbox. The Rota was the only 4-bore he had ever seen advertised in the Shotgun News. Hello, the man answered on the fourth ring. Yes, sir, I'm calling about the ad you ran in Shotgun News about the Rota double rifle for sale. Do you still have it, or has it been sold? Well, fellow said he wanted it for sure, but didn't have the money yet. Told him I'd give him till noon on Friday. I see, Henry said. The day after tomorrow. What can you tell me about the gun? Well, it's a full-weight 4, back-action underlever hammer gun, dual triggers, of course, 24 pounds empty with 24-inch barrels, bores are mint, extractor gun, no ejectors, of course. Outside of the barrels, there's a few pits, but the gun's 90+% original finish. Action's tight. You can't pull the barrels off the face. Splinter forend, but on a 4, it's a pretty big splinter, the man said with a laugh. Dark wood, nice straight grain, no figure to speak of. Got a small repair in the grip, just back of the tang, but you have to look real close. It was done right, and looks as if it's been that way for a long while. Cheek piece for a right-handed shooter. Pad's been replaced, but I don't know how long ago. Case is original and has a bunch of real old steamship stickers on it, so the gun's been used in either Africa or India or both. Leather straps are missing. Got one lathe-turned brass case, some fiber wads, and a bullet mold. Somebody made up for it a few years ago. Big 2,000 grain conical job. What's the length of pull? I'd have to measure it, and it's down in the safe, but the stock hasn't been shortened or lengthened or anything, if that's what you mean. Have you shot it? Henry asked. Not with full loads, the man admitted. I fired a few rounds with 100 grains of double F. Didn't kick as bad as I thought. No shit, Henry said to himself. The correct load's between 380 and 440 grains of powder, depending on what the gun was regulated for. He took a breath and asked the question, what's the price? It's the best gun I've ever owned, the man on the other end of the line said with a sigh. It was a comment that sellers used as a matter of course, but in this case Henry knew the man was speaking the truth. Henry Bowman felt that the only finer weapon in existence would have to be another 4-bore. I wanted $8,500 for it, the seller continued. This one fellow made me a firm offer of $8,000, and I'm giving him until noon on Friday to get me the money. If he doesn't and you want it for $8, it's yours. Henry swallowed. Okay, he said, after just a moment's hesitation. But I have to have a one-day inspection. I don't doubt your description. It sounds as if you're very thorough. But I intend to shoot this gun, and if the stock doesn't fit me, I can't take it. I'll call you within an hour after I get the gun to tell you if I'm keeping it, and I'll pay shipping both ways if I send it back. Sounds fair to me. Three-day inspection's normal. I won't need near that long. What's your full name and mailing address, and are there any other phone numbers I should have to reach you at noon on Friday? The man at the other end of the line gave him the information. I'll call you at exactly noon, Henry promised, and hung up. Now I've got to wait until Friday, he thought. December 20th, 1974. Bureau of Standards? Yes, sir, I know you're not the bank, but I've got to set a clock to the exact time within a second or two is good enough, and I can't get your radio signal here, Henry said into the phone. Can you help me out? What time zone? Central. It's 17 after 10 and about 40 seconds. Hang with me and I'll give you when it hits 18 after. Thanks, I'll wait. Henry had stopped his watch with the second hand on the 12 before he made the call. Now he adjusted the minute hand to show 18 after 10 and prepared to push in the stem to restart the timepiece. Right now. Got it. Thanks a lot. Henry broke the connection. Shut that fucking kid up, Boone Caswell commanded. He liked to stay in bed on Sundays after a night of heavy drinking. Boone looked at the clock beside the bed. 6:30. Christ, it's too goddamn early in the morning for this shit. He turned over in bed, but it was no use. The crying bored into his brain, making his hangover even worse. Myra, can't you shut her up? Caswell climbed out of bed, naked, and marched into the living room. His 4-year-old daughter, Cindy, sat on the couch, trembling as she cried. She wanted to tell her parents that she'd just had a terrible nightmare. When she saw she had succeeded in summoning her father, she increased the volume. To Boone Caswell, it seemed as if a hot steel needle were being thrust into his brain. Shut the fuck up, he bellowed, and delivered a vicious slap across Cindy's face. The blow knocked her sideways on the couch. It was the first time Boone Caswell had ever struck his daughter, and his action had the opposite of the intended result. Cindy screamed even more loudly. Nonetheless, Boone Caswell was smiling when he returned to his bedroom. At 5 seconds past 11 local time, Henry Bowman made the call. Hello? Good afternoon. Henry Bowman in St. Louis calling again about the Rhoda. Please tell me it hasn't been sold. Yeah, hey, I got your cashier's check this morning. Didn't know you were going to overnight it to me. Nice of you to put in an extra $40 for shipping, too. Lots of folks always want the seller to pay for it. Did the other guy come through? Henry asked quickly. Haven't heard from him. There was a pause. Yeah, my clock says it's a couple minutes after noon. So it's mine? Unless you change your mind when you see it. I mean, if this other guy shows up here as soon as we hang up and he's got 8,000 in $100 bills in hand, it's still my gun, right? Henry repeated. The man on the other end laughed. That's how I do business. I gave him till noon. It's past that time. His money ain't here and yours is. You bought yourself a 4-bore double rifle, mister. Been looking for one, I take it? For 15 years, Henry said with feeling. As it turned out, Henry Bowman had not needed to call Fort Collins to get the exact time. The other man who had wanted the gun did not contact the owner of the big rifle to tell him he'd rounded up the money until almost 12:30, and when he did, it was over the phone and not in person. He was very upset to learn that the gun had been sold, but as a serious buyer, he played by the rules and knew that the roles could have been reversed. The seller called to Henry and suggested waiting until after Christmas before dropping the package off at the UPS office. Henry Bowman reluctantly agreed to this sensible recommendation. December 30th, 1974. Oh my God, Henry thought when he lifted the lid of the 90-year-old fitted oak and leather trunk case and pushed aside the newspaper that had been used to cushion the contents. The rifle which lay inside had seen substantial use, but it had been well cared for considering it had been built for hard service. The quality of the workmanship was superb, and the size, Henry marveled. It was just as he remembered in the photo Al Goodman had showed him years ago. The overall length of the Rhoda was no greater than his .577 Rigby, but is much more massive. Henry Bowman lifted the barrels out of the felt-lined compartment, swung the fore-end lever to the side, and removed the fore-end. He examined the bores. They were mint, as promised, and huge. He stuck his thumb in the muzzle of the right barrel. It didn't even touch both sides. They're so big I could almost... well, not quite, Henry thought. He hung the barrels from a piece of string and wrapped them with a wooden ruler. They rang like a big gong. He laid the barrels on the carpet, lifted the stocked receiver out of the case, and swung the big underlever to the side. He picked up the barrels, fitted them to the breech, and swung them shut while returning the underlever to its original position. Then he fitted the fore-end iron to the barrels and locked it in place with the fore-end lever. He cocked the hammers and stuffed a sock in between their noses and the firing pins, then tested both triggers. They broke cleanly with no trace of creep, with a rather heavy pull, Henry was pleased to note. Henry stood up, closed his eyes, and threw the 24-pound rifle to his shoulder with one fluid motion. When he opened his eyes, the front sight bead was resting in the V-notch of the 50-yard rear leaf. The stock would not have fit Henry any better if he had been the original owner for whom the gun was built. He was grinning like an idiot as he carried the big rifle over to the end of the couch and picked up the telephone. January 25th, 1975. I don't think you really need 25, but I got 'em all done, Kurt Benke said as he led Henry Bowman in the back door of his basement workshop. I know you're champing at the bit to go fire that monster. Matter of fact, I'd like to watch. Henry followed the gunsmith over to his cluttered workbench. Benke reached into a box and pulled out a polished brass cartridge case 4 inches long and about 1 1/4 inch in diameter, which he handed to Henry. Only a handful of makers in England had ever made 4-bore rifles, and each firm's gun used ammunition that was specific to the manufacturer. Henry had never intended to even look for the correct original ammunition for his gun. Even if it could be located, 100-year-old ammo loaded with black powder would not likely still deliver original ballistics. If it did, it would still be too valuable to collectors to justify shooting it up. Henry had obtained a 10-foot length of 1 3/8 round brass bar stock and cut it in half so he could get it in Kurt Benke's basement. Benke had used his power hacksaw and lathe to make 25 cases that exactly fit Henry's gun. Cut the primer pocket for 50 machine gun primers like you wanted, but I think a shotgun primer have been plenty, Benke opined as he went to his safe and retrieved the barrels to Henry's Rhoda. 400 grains of FG black is a lot to light off, Henry replied as he dropped the oiled case into the right chamber. It fit perfectly. He extracted it and tried it in the left one with the same results. Near as I could tell with my inside mics, the chambers are within a couple tenths of each other, the gunsmith said. When did you say the gun was made? 1880, Henry answered. Little more precision work involved than on an 1873 lever-action 4440, huh? He said it with an upraised eyebrow. Benke nodded in agreement, then moved over to his lathe. Here's the shell holder I made, and here's your neck sizing die, your seating punch, and your crimp die. All threaded 1.5" 12 for that Hollywood press of yours. You sure it's got enough leverage? It sizes my 20mm cannon brass okay, Henry pointed out. Oh, right. Kurt Benke periodically seemed to forget about some of the larger guns that Henry Bowman owned and used. He himself did not own a rifle larger than .30 caliber, although that would change after his 70th birthday, when continued exposure to Henry Bowman's enthusiasm for elephant guns would prompt Benke to build one for himself. Henry inspected the handmade loading tools. They were flawlessly machined. How much do I owe you? He asked. Benke looked pained. I've got over 40 hours and all that stuff. I've got to have 300. He did not let on, but he still thought of Henry Bowman as the 10-year-old who had first come into the basement workshop with his father in 1963. You take cash on Saturdays? Henry asked as he reached into his pocket. It was an old joke. If that's all you got, the old man replied deadpan. You busy tomorrow, Kurt, or would you like to watch me break my collarbone? I'm going out to the range to see how it shoots, Henry said as he handed over the bills. I'll be there by 8:30, Benke grinned. Here goes nothing, Henry Bowman said as he pulled the butt into his shoulder, tightened his grip on the forend, leaned forward and squeezed the front trigger with his right index finger. He had placed a large, heavy wooden crate on top of the concrete shooting bench and a cheap, loosely rolled sleeping bag on top of the crate. The sleeping bag was in such a position that Henry could rest his left forearm on it while holding the rifle and standing straight up. It was how he shot double rifles for accuracy, for it allowed support while permitting the gun to recoil in the same way that it would when fired offhand. This was important for double rifles, for unlike single-barrel rifles, the axis of each bore on a double was to the side of the axis of recoil, not in line with it. If a double rifle were shot off sandbags, it would shoot to a different point of impact than when it was fired offhand. The trigger broke at 16 pounds, and the huge rifle rocked Henry's body backwards about 10 degrees as a deep whoom rattled the galvanized roof over the firing line. The large cloud of white smoke which had belched out of the gun's muzzle began to drift away in the wind. Henry lowered the rifle and looked at Kurt Benke. Not bad at all. I could shoot that load all day. Of course, it wasn't a full charge. Both men stared downrange at the 50-yard target butt. No problem spotting your shots with that gun, Benke said immediately as he hopped from one foot to the other in the cold weather. The 1-inch bullet hole was very easy to see with the naked eye at the 50-yard distance. Henry had used black spray paint, butcher paper, and a paper plate to stencil a black ring for a target. His shot was 2 inches outside the black at 2 o'clock, which put it about 8 inches right of center and 3 inches high. He cocked the left hammer and took aim again, this time squeezing the rear trigger. The big gun boomed again, and this shot was a mirror image of the first shot on the left side of the target. The two holes were at the same height, spaced about 15 inches apart. "Ha!" Henry yelled with pleasure when he saw where his second shot had gone. "That's good?" the bench-rest gunsmith and record holder asked dubiously. 15 inches apart for 2 shots at 50 yards was good for a bow and arrow, maybe, but not any rifle Benke would want to own. Elevation's identical, and the barrels are shooting apart and high with a load that's too light. That's a real good sign. The gun starts recoiling as soon as the primer goes off. With a lighter powder charge, there's more time between the primer ignites and when the bullet leaves the muzzle. That means the right barrel should shoot right and high, and the left barrel should shoot left and high. That's the theory, at least. Remember the engineer's creed? When the results don't agree with the theory, believe the results and come up with a new theory, the gunsmith answered. Right. Let's see what results we get when we up the powder charge 50 grains. Kurt Benke winced. Bench rest shooters fired cartridges which held around 25 grains total. A 300 Magnum case held 3 times that. A cartridge where the shooter might elect to increase the powder charge by 50 grains was an assault on Benke's sensibilities. "What load were you shooting?" he managed to ask. 300 grains of single FG. Because this gun weighs a full 24 pounds, I suspect it was regulated for the full 16-gram charge. That's 1 ounce, or 480 and 38 grains. The next pair I'll shoot is a 350 grain charge, same bullet. What's your bullet weight? The slugs I'm shooting weigh 2,140 grains out of linotype metal. Some of these old guns were regulated for a round ball cast out of pure lead, which would weigh 1750 grains. Most of them were set up for conical bullets, though, as near as I can determine. If it still shoots apart with the 440 grain charge, I'll have to shoot lighter bullets. Kurt Benke watched as Henry extracted the fired case and replaced them with another pair. He did not ask Henry if he had brought ammunition loaded with the 440 grain charge he had mentioned. He believed he already knew the answer. The report of the next 2 shots were noticeably different. It was both louder and sharper, and the older man could see that the gun recoiled with more vigor. On the second shot, he watched the target instead of the shooter and was startled to see large quantities of dirt and ice from the backstop thrown 20 feet in the air behind the target frame. The holes in the paper were 8 inches apart, spaced equally on either side of the center, and an inch high. "Looks like your theory is holding up. Nice not to need a spotting scope, don't you think? Recoil still okay?" "It's definitely getting heavier. Notice the difference in sound?" Those two were supersonic. 1,100 feet per second, Benke said immediately. For some reason, it did not occur to him that the huge bullets could be driven that fast out of a gun, which could still be fired from the shoulder. "We're not done yet. Here comes 400 grains." Henry pushed his earplugs in a little deeper, reloaded the rota, and rested his arm against the rolled sleeping bag. He made a conscious effort to grip the gun as tightly as possible. The recoil, while still manageable, was unlike that of any other weapon he had ever used, and he didn't want to drop the gun. This time the report sounded to Henry like standing next to a tree as it was struck by lightning. A 1-inch hole appeared in the paper less than 2 inches right of center and dead on for elevation. Henry cocked the left hammer and took aim again. His second shot was a little higher than his first, and a little over 3 inches left of it. "How high are you going to go?" the old man asked. "I loaded some at 440, Henry replied. "I'll clean the gunk out of the barrels and give 'em a go." He swung the underlever to the side, broke the gun open, emptied it, and laid it on a blanket next to the shooting bench. Henry Bowman picked up an aluminum shotgun cleaning rod with a 12-gauge brush screwed in the end and wrapped a large piece of rag around the bristles. He sprayed the cloth liberally with WD-40, sprayed more into the breech of the right barrel, and shoved the rod down the bore from the breech. When the wrapped brush emerged from the muzzle, it was thoroughly caked with shiny black carbon residue. Henry inspected the bore, then used a new piece of rag to repeat the process with the other barrel. "There's a lot of it, but it seems to come right out. I think the Alox and beeswax bullet lube I'm using may be an improvement over what the Brits had 100 years ago," Henry said. "Although it wouldn't surprise me if they had something just as good or better," he amended after a moment's reflection. Fresh target this time, Henry said as he removed 2 big cartridges from the bag he had labeled 440 and loaded the gun. He wiped the fog from his shooting glasses and assumed the position at the standing rest. This time he made an effort to put his feet a little farther back so that he'd be leaning into the gun a little more. The blasts were tremendous, and recoil rocked Henry back until the muzzles of his rifle were pointing up at about a 45-degree angle. Henry brought the gun down out of recoil and cocked the left hammer. He settled back into the bag and locked into position again as he switched his index finger to the rear trigger. It looks like The sound of the second shot cut off Kurt Benke's comment about where Henry's first shot had gone. Henry laid the gun down on the blanket and both men squinted off into the distance. Almost touching, the older man said, with admiration in his voice. Let me put 2 more of the same load in there, see if they fall in the same group. Henry had loaded 4 rounds each with 444 and 440 grain charges, and 8 rounds of 300 and 350 grain loadings. He replaced the fired cases with his 2 remaining rounds that carried the heaviest charge. Kurt Benke stepped several paces to the side and held the camera trained on his friend. Benke was braced against one of the roof supports, for he knew the blast would jar a freehand hold. At the shot, the gunsmith tripped the shutter, catching Henry in full recoil. Henry Bowman recovered, cocked the left hammer, and let drive with the second barrel. He looked over at his 59-year-old companion. Doesn't look too bad, he opined. The target showed 2 pairs of overlapping holes, about an inch of space between them. Elevation was perfect. Benke stared at the target butt. You going to raise the charge again? He asked, uncertainly. The barrels were obviously very close to regulating perfectly. I think I'll lower the bullet weight instead. Could you take 1/8 of an inch off the base in the lathe without too much trouble? Yeah, sure. Put 'em in the collet chuck. I could give you a half dozen each of several different weights. You don't need 1,000 or anything like that, do you? Both men broke into laughter at that idea. Henry wiped down the rota and laid it on the blanket. I think I'll give my central nervous system a rest for a while. Shall we shoot some varmint rifles? 300 yards? 5 groups, average for record. Loser buys lunch. What kind of handicap do I have to give you? Benke asked cautiously. None, I'm in too good of a mood about my 4-bore. Kurt Benke just smiled. When they were finished shooting, Kurt Benke had an average group size of 1.42 inches. All his groups were nearly round. Henry's groups had a little over 1.5 inches of vertical dispersion, but on that gusty January day, the horizontal spread averaged almost 4 inches. His targets were what Kurt Benke liked to refer to as weather reports. Henry Bowman was still grinning when he picked up the check for a late lunch.